Okay, so we are talking today with a small group that represent actually an alliance that's been set up this past year to discuss the future of home education or strategies for dealing with the challenges home educators face in the UK. I don't need to really go into all the preamble that's been covered in quite a few other sessions, but things are changing, and we've never really got to grips with the possibility of maybe needing a legal defense fund before, but we are having to start discussing that, particularly in the light of the Portsmouth Judicial Review, looking at funding that was needed there and so on. So your panel this morning, or this afternoon, whichever way you see 12 noon, Anne actually was a home educated young person herself. So she has kind of been one of those really spearheading this initiative. And then we have Rachel, who is actually from Portsmouth community, and Lil, who's done a lot of work in Scotland with home education in Scotland. And they can actually fill you in a little more on what their particular interest is in the topic. So I'm going to just hand over to them and take myself out of the picture. So go for it.
Thank you. Thanks very much for that intro, Juliet. So today's session, we're going to be talking a little bit about our plan, our idea to start a fund so that we can defend cases of national importance, because it's about time that we're ready to fight back. We know over the last few years, the pressure on home education and the rhetoric against home education in the UK has been increasingly negative, and that's been coming from government and media, despite the fact that the numbers of people who are home educating has increased. And even during the pandemic, people who have discovered home education and have decided that they like it and that they want to carry on. So we really want to make sure that the freedom that we have in the UK to home educate without interference and to choose the learning style that best suits our families is still maintained. And what we're going to do today is we'll talk a bit more in detail about what the plans are for the fund and how you can help in a moment. But we're going to start off with, first of all, Lil setting a bit of the scene and a bit of the history and some of the lessons we can learn from a similar era in home education history in the UK, which is the Badman era. Sorry, a trigger word for some people who are watching. And then Rahel can talk a little bit about what's going on in Portsmouth and why having a fund ready to go would have made everybody's lives a lot easier. So Lil, if I start off with you.
That's great. I will confuse people now by saying I am in Scotland, but I started out in Westminster. So what you're getting is a kind of history of all my interactions with Westminster over the course of 10 or 15 years. I started home educating back in 2005, and that was right in the trouble was brewing era. So then we had a Labour government, and my first point that I would like to make to everybody is this is not a party political problem. We started off with the problems under Labour, we've been through the Lib Dem coalition, and we're now with Tories. It's an ongoing problem. The thing that they were faffing with at the time was children missing education, which was a bit of a side line really, but it's a piece of law which they kept changing the guidance on, and we therefore, I'm flagging this up because we really need to be aware of all the side issues legally that come in. Often it's stuff that comes in to do with school stuff that then suddenly has implications for us. And statutory instruments can change things very rapidly. So that's the second thing to look out for. Because trouble was brewing, Education Otherwise at the time decided it would all be a good idea if we engage with the local authorities. So this is the good news bit, in that I became part of a stakeholder group at Westminster. And we had a fantastically positive experience. They were very friendly. We did joint consultation responses. We were able to rewrite their policy document. We were involved with talking to Ofsted. We were involved with training educational social workers. So my third point is it is possible to have a really positive engagement with your local authority. Do not get put off. They're not all devils and evil and all that kind of thing. Anyway, the sad truth was that then Westminster became part of the Tri-Borough. So we had a massive regime change in that this whole idea was that 3 local authorities would share services. And the lovely people we were working with got sidelined, and we were foisted with Hammersmith and Fulham's policy, and the lady in charge there, who was really rather hostile. So we had then many years of complaints, of trying to communicate this to councillors. The stakeholder group was sidelined. Their policy from Hammersmith was imposed with no due process. We tried the MP. We got Graham Stewart, who was then chair of the Educational Select Committee, involved. He wrote to the lady in charge. He wrote twice. He got the Minister for Education to write. He got in touch with a chap who was in charge of all children's services at Westminster. We finally got a council hearing. All of that achieved absolutely nothing. So my third point is that in this process, politicians are pretty powerless. All the way through this, there were a lot of families who were suffering quite badly because the policy was such that they had worked away, which I think a lot of local authorities have done post Badman and the legislation failing, a way of just bullying and harassing people into submission. So there were two cases that have happened fairly recently, and you might have seen them in the press, where the Triborough ended up in court, or nearly in court. Most recently, that involves the child star of Matilda. Lillian got the part, but came from a family where they were completely under the radar. But of course, because she had a job, she needed a performance license. So she then became known to the local education authority. And that was all fine. They issued the license and the year of rehearsals and performances happened. And then immediately all the publicity had finished. The parents were told that the local authority was not satisfied with their provision. And this was basically because they were refusing to jump through the hoops, which was either to be seen with the child or to provide tutor reports. And then there was another year of stress and harassment. And eventually they were, or Lillian was given the school attendance order, which they did not comply with. So there was a huge fear throughout this that they were going to be taken to court, that they might be fined. But eventually the child was never taken to court because their case was absolutely watertight. And the way that the Triborough found around this was to come up with some third party who they reckoned was a suitable report to say they could tick her off, although this was not initiated by the family at all. Before that, there was another case where the family did go to court. Oh, I should say, after this, the parents complained. This is my next thing. They went through the whole complaints policy. That takes 3 to get through the various layers. Then you go on to the ombudsman. All they discovered in this process was that even the ombudsman can only say if the staff are following the policy, but they can't determine if the policy is following the legal framework that it should. So the complaints structure, is my next point, is pointless. So this other family did end up in court. They started off thinking that they would be able to represent themselves to the magistrates. The magistrate, they didn't understand quite how that worked out, but the magistrate assumed the local authority knew what they were talking about, sided with them. They ended up with a whacking fine for not having the child attend school. And then they appealed. This is the next point, which is this is where it starts getting kind of dangerous for the rest of the community, because if we end up with case law, that can adversely affect us all. So we got involved and gently persuaded Sophie that she desperately needed a barrister. She got herself a barrister, but we had a not specialist barrister. So we needed to brief the barrister. So the home education community had the knowledge that was required, but we still had the cost of taking or employing the barrister. But because that happened, the case was then thrown out. All the fees, fines that she was supposed to have paid were removed. But the whole thing with this is that unless you actually take it to court, unless you get to that point, you're not getting justice. There were lots and lots of families who would not take that battle. And if you're going to take that battle, it can risk the rest of our community. So this is why we're beginning to think like this. and Rahel will tell what the next phase of this is. But it's like ever since Badman, we've had a whole load of people or a whole load of local authorities who've really been specializing in finding ways around the law so that they can regulate and monitor and generally boss us around. And so it's getting worse rather than better. Anyway, that's me. I will hand you on. I will put in the chat, I've got the various points. I've got links to the press stories, so I shall pop those in now.
Thanks very much, because I think that really sort of illustrates the fact that the complaints procedure isn't great, that we're having bad treatment from local authorities, and that there are places where if your case does end up in court and you've got a school attendance order and it ends up in the Crown Court, at that point case law can be made, which could change the rules for everyone. And so you pointed out the complaints procedure, and the Ombudsman way doesn't work. So the way that does work is getting the policy reviewed in judicial review, which is a very cheap and stress-free option, isn't it, Rahel?
Very, very cheap and stress-free. We only had to raise so far, what was it? It's over, all told, it's over £40,000 that we've raised. And I think out of this, we've used over around 20,000 already. Yeah, so we started having serious problems with Portsmouth only recently. It was never a great local authority, but it was one of those middling ones. We started having more serious problems in 2018. Yeah, end of 2018 towards 2019. In 2019, we started doing all of what Lil described. We were meeting with the city council. We had, we had meetings with the politicians. We had meetings with the management. These didn't get us anywhere with the council, although I still recommend you try, because our neighboring Hampshire still have a really good relationship with the local authority, because it did work with them. So you never know. And it is worth a try. And it's also worth a try because you can tell yourself and your community that you did everything. So that's important sometimes. And when things continued to get worse, we started putting in complaints. As Lil said, the local government ombudsman has no teeth, will only review the very narrow question of if the local authority adhered by its own policies and not if the policies are lawful. And so, and even then, even if they find them to be wrong, they can't actually compel them to change. They can only make recommendations. So it's still a good idea to put in complaints, again, because you never know, it has worked in some local authorities, and because it can form the basis for judicial review. So don't be put off, go through the complaint process if there's any chance of needing a judicial review down the line. Yeah, and then when we decided to go to a judicial review, everything kicked into high gear, and I don't know if I can give a fair overview of the amount of work and the number of people who are involved in this. We have, at last count, it was 16 families who are under SAO at the moment in Portsmouth, including me. But I think we just had 2 more in the beginning of this week. So all of the people who have gotten an NTS and SAO, we have been helping them with writing letters, writing complaints, escalating complaints, communicating, things like that. We've had to do all of the communication with the barrister and with the solicitors, providing, kind of information back and forth. We've had to do all of the media ourselves, and there was a lot of media work. We have a specific group for fundraising that we pulled in people from Hampshire to help us because they are not under stress themselves, and we utilize the really very good relationships we've built with our neighboring community. So they've been helping us with fundraising. That means also updating all of our supporters. The support we've got was just amazing. It really, I mean, we're so grateful for it. The community really came behind us. But it still involved a lot of work that I think people aren't aware of, just setting up the fundraiser and the PayPal account, the bank account, and for the bank account we needed to set ourselves up as a company, and the Stripe account and the Chuffed account, and communicating with all of these different financial structures, and it's just so much work. And we, even with all of the support, we did need at some point, when we were making the decision to put in the judicial review, because there was back and forth with Portsmouth City Council, and at the last minute, the decision was made with about 24 hours before actually filing the judicial review, and we needed about £6,000 immediately. We got those from Education Otherwise as a loan, because the fundraising was astonishingly quick, but putting up a fundraiser takes time. So we couldn't use the fundraiser to get that sum. And we were very, very lucky that Education Otherwise happened to have those funds and could loan them to us. But they don't always have that amount sitting, just sitting there. So if they wouldn't have had it, then we couldn't have bought the JR at all. Yeah, it's really, I don't think any other community wants to do what we did. And I don't know if we would have done it if we knew ahead of time just how much work it would be, just what we were going into. And we really needed to kind of figure everything out as we were going, and build everything as we were running. And if we can save that work from the next community, that would be great. If we could enable communities that maybe aren't as big or aren't as strong, or maybe individual families who don't have a strong community around them, to bring those landmark cases, that will benefit the whole community, the whole national community. So yeah, it's really important.
Thank you. So that kind of segues quite neatly into why we want to have a national fund. So as Rahel says, it's just to take some of the pressure off a local group, so that if something happens that might be nationally affecting, so you have gone through all the complaints process, you followed all the procedure, and yet the policy is unlawful and it really does need taking to judicial review. That might be one example. Or if a case has got to the stage of being in Crown Court where case law might be being made, so not the earlier stages, or if the government does some sort of review and then releases a report and we need to challenge that report, and maybe we need to go after what the procedure has happened. We need money there ready to fund legal stuff, and to fund lawyers, and to fund legal opinion, because sometimes it's not sinking 40,000 on a judicial review. It might be needing 2,000 or 3,000 to have an official barrister opinion, so then the appropriate letter can be written to an authority, which might be enough to make them back down. And so what we want to do is to get a fund together, which would need the whole community to come together and to donate, either in fundraising bursts, or if every home educating family in the land donated £1 a month, we'd have enough. And so this would be, in the first case, the phase one of the project would be for cases of national importance. So anything that might affect case law, anything that might be a judicial review where we need to keep the law that we currently have in place, those kind of things. Phase two of the project would be trying to increase legal awareness. So we're working with other, it would be a new organisation we're forming, but we're working very closely with organisations like Schoolhouse, the Centre for Personalised Education, Education Otherwise. We don't want to overlap on work that already exists and that people are doing, but we do need a kind of a hub for expertise in the law, to train more barristers, to train more solicitors, to train more local authority staff, to train more parents to know what the law is. And that could be signposting to resources that already exist, or it could be in the future running courses. And then if we were bringing in millions of pounds a year, which would be lovely, wouldn't it? A phase three in many, many years' time could be to help families with individual legal costs, but we are nowhere near that yet. So I think the first thing to make really plain is that our initial target is to have funds available so that we are ready to take judicial review or to pay for legal advice. The new organisation that we want to form wouldn't be taking those cases, we'd be paying the bill. So if Portsmouth came along, or Plymouth or Durham or whoever came along and said, look, we're having real trouble in our area and we need to take a judicial review, they could apply for some funds, and then we could support them by giving a grant towards that need, assuming that, you know, obviously if we had lots of cases coming at once, we're going to have a panel of people who make the decision, but that would be the idea, that we had these funds ready and available so that very quickly, you know, a barrister's opinion could be got, and that might actually nip some of these cases in the bud. And then the local community doesn't have to go through, as well as being, let's say, persecuted, in fact, by their local authority and having to deal with the stress and the worry of what's going to happen to their family or the families in their community. They don't, on top of that, then have to start raising tens of thousands of pounds and setting up organisations, all that kind of stuff that Rahel was talking about. So we just want to be ready, because we know that Portsmouth isn't an anomaly. This isn't a one-off thing that's going to happen. This is a trend, and it's happening across the country. I moderate LA's Behaving Badly on Facebook, where people share stories of bad local authority behaviour. You know, we've had the Education Select Committee review, the Department for Education review. We're forever having children's commissioners putting out inaccurate information about statistics to do with home education. You know, this is a long slog that we've got ahead of us, because there is definitely a change in the political will at the moment to stop education being a private family choice and to start making it something that the state really wants to get heavily involved in and control. And that might mean that you, as we've seen from all of the talks from our friends in other countries yesterday, you know, you might find that home education looks very different in the future if we don't fight for it. So the next steps are that we have got a group of us who've been meeting regularly, and we've been taking some legal advice. We would like to set up as a charity, but we're not sure if that's going to be possible, because some of what we're doing, we're trying to work out whether or not it's allowed as a charity, and setting up as a charity takes months and months. So our initial thing that we're going to do is set up as a company limited by guarantee. And a company doesn't mean a business, it's simply a legal structure so that you can have a bank account and keep all the money separate from all the individual volunteers, because obviously it wouldn't be a good idea to have people's money being mixed up. So we'll be setting up a company limited by guarantee, and then we can start getting in donations, and then we can start working towards whether or not we're able to register as a charity a bit further down the line. So what we've got today, because that is taking a little while to get all the bits together so that we can then set up and then have a proper bank account. We've got a temporary web page where you can put in your email address and your contact details, because not only will we want people who are willing to donate money on a one-off or a regular basis in future, we're also looking for people who would like to get involved as volunteers, particularly those with fundraising experience. And if anybody is, you know, is hiding the fact that they're an education specialist, solicitor or lawyer or barrister who would like to get involved, please make yourself known, because that would be incredibly helpful. We've got some wonderful people who are already helping out, but we really want to make sure that we are representing across the whole home ed community, and that we're making use of the skills that we already have in the community too. Now the temporary web page has been a little bit falling over, but it's I did have a nicer address that looked a bit prettier, but it was throwing up errors. It is a secure site, but it is here. It's the one that sort of starts with MailChimp in it. And so if you could put your details in there, there's a box at the bottom. That would be wonderful. And I suppose, unless Lil and Rahel want to mention something that I've forgotten to say, we should probably see if there are any questions. I haven't checked the chat. And the other thing to say is that the first sort of period of time, there will obviously be some fees that we have to raise just to kind of keep all the admin of the organisation running. We're not going to be paying any of the volunteers or anything like that, but you know, there's dull stuff like having to pay for website domains and bank account fees and all that kind of thing. So we'll be needing to raise some money for that, as well as for the ongoing fund. And we've got a working title for the organisation, but we're also looking for particularly if there are any children with better names. So we've got Home Education Legal Protection, because it stands for HELP, as the organisation working title, but better names are suggestions are welcome. And we're also thinking that the legal defence part of it, the working title for that is the Joy Baker Fund, after Joy Baker, who the 60th anniversary is coming up of Joy. She was really the person who secured modern era home education, so normal families being able to home educate, and Norfolk County Council kept taking her to court. And in November this year, it will be the 60th anniversary of her winning her cases and absolutely proving that you don't have to be the aristocracy to educate your child at home. So yeah, thank you. Any more? I don't know if we've got any questions or any questions from our moderator.
Okay, I can't see that there's just Danielle's actually. Hang on. Yeah, just saying that where can I sign up for a monthly giving to this? So I think that is in the chat. So I think we'll make sure that we actually save the chat.
Yes, please, Danielle. we would love you to give the money for the giving. If you could put your email address in on the form, when we're then set up with the bank account and everything, we'll then email everyone and go, hooray, you can now donate. But a regular donation would be amazing, because we've worked out we'll probably need to have, thank you Danielle, you're wonderful. Those regular donations will make a huge difference, because we think in an ideal world we probably need to raise about 100,000 a year, because that's 2 judicial reviews. And if we just think about the number of cases that we kind of know of just informally, we'll easily be having to have the money ready for 2 judicial reviews a year. So it's, you know, it feels like a lot of money, but actually once you divide it amongst all the home educating community, it's not too bad, so long as everyone kind of is able to join in.
Yeah, sorry, I was just going to say, it's just really, really encouraging to see how the home education have really rallied around, you know, obviously this is the first, it's a precedent, but I think it's really struck home to a lot of people the reality that actually, you know, once you have one, who's going to be next? You know, I think there's a lot of people kind of, not exactly quaking in the boots, but, you know, just very aware that actually it could be us next. So obviously, I think there'll be a huge support. I really hope that there'll be a huge support. I always say, when it touches your heart, it touches your pocket. And
I like that.
I really hope and pray that actually, you know, that's what happens. And certainly from my perspective, working with Chess and all the Christian home educating families, we will be telling people about this. We'll be encouraging. We might even look at, you know, every member that joins, putting that £1, something like that, you know, a scheme where we are actually, as a matter of course, you know, promoting.
Gosh, that would just be amazing, because, you know, it's sort of been something we've been talking about, and then you don't really know the reaction is going to be, if people are going to want it or if they're not. And obviously there's a huge responsibility, because, you know, the community's money coming in, and you kind of hope that, we obviously want to make sure we have really fair procedures in place for allocating it. But I think for me, it's at that stage where doing nothing is not an option. So there's always a risk that we do something and we do the wrong thing. But I don't think at this stage, with all the things that are happening, I don't think that we're going to make anything worse by putting up a fight, you know. I remember Neil Taylor Moore, who was a very active home educator back in the Badman era. He used to say that we need to be difficult and dangerous prey. And I think that's something to take to heart. Or what were we called? Whether the newspaper the other day referred to us as a bunch of jackals, which was not very kind, but, you know, we should perhaps start taking that. Right, fine. If you're going to call us a bunch of jackals, then that's what we're going to be. But I can't imagine anything less like a jackal than the home educating community. Maybe more a fluffy koala bear or something.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, obviously, one of the things that I'm thinking is that organisations need to kind of get involved. So I don't know if you've kind of, obviously you've had a lot of thoughts and you're going through the whole process, but that's one of the things, you know, what organisations are there? We all kind of need to get on board and get behind you and kind of work together.
Yeah,
so, you know,
that's true. What we have been reached, so we are in touch with quite a lot of the organisations and the large Facebook groups, but obviously more are welcome. We have, because it's a UK thing, and obviously the law can be different in different parts of the UK. Obviously, we've got nice links with Schoolhouse. We have been keeping the Northern Irish and the Welsh groups in the loop as well. But obviously, if there are people from those nations that want to get more involved, then that would be wonderful. You know, it's just a case of everybody's very busy and not everyone wants to set up a legal organisation.
The website is going to be key in that, isn't it? Because at the moment, the easiest way is to kind of share links and so on, you know.
Yeah, and so just to say, the reason it's a temporary page at the moment is purely because it's just so much easier once you've actually got the organisation set up to then set all the other assets up from that. So that's why we've got a slightly random MailChimp page at the moment. It's just that until the official organisation is set up, and we're just waiting. We've had someone with legal expertise very kindly offered to donate their time to write all the official paperwork that we have to do to get set up. So we're just that's just the sort of hold up at the moment. But assuming that we don't get an overwhelming reaction today of people going no, then, you know, watch this space really. We want to get that going quite soon so that we can get some money coming in. But it's really reassuring to hear that people, at least on this call, are going, that's a good idea, rather than what. So.
Yeah, I think it's just going to be more and more necessary. You can't, having heard all that we've heard over the course of this conference, you know, not just kind of nationally but internationally, you just think we're on one road basically. You know, it is heading in a direction. There's very much a sense that we are going to this place where it is going to get more difficult rather than less difficult. And I think, you know, we need to be prepared, and I think it's great. You know, this precedent is a good thing if it mobilizes everybody. I mean, you know, obviously we're all sorry for all the duress and the stress that you're going through in Portsmouth, but you know, it's very much kind of laying the foundation, isn't it, for like a really solid defense, and it's bringing people together in a way that, you know, I mean, this conference has just brought so many kind of heads together, and the conversations will continue. And I just think that is just very encouraging. You know, obviously it's discouraging in a sense when you hear all these awful LEAs, but, you know, I'm taking on board as well the responsibility that I have at whatever level I can be involved, that, you know, I need to be proactive. And I think there is a responsibility on anyone who's home educating to be aware and to kind of chip in and to do their own little bit. And that's financially as well as, you know, raising awareness, talking about home ed in a positive way, all those things, you know, it's beginning to really matter, and everybody needs to take those things on board. So yeah.
Can I just leap in, doing the boring old person with the practical things? I'm currently trustee of Schoolhouse up in Scotland, which is a charity. And one of the things that happens here, which I was, you know, we only give information. We are not allowed to give advice, because the minute you are advising people, you can become legally liable. And so this is one of the difficulties with what we're trying to do now. We have to be very careful in all our paperwork, and we will need far bigger insurance costs for what we're doing. I know it sounds kind of frightening for people if they're going to be giving money to what looks like a company limited by guarantee at the moment. But, you know, all of these sort of nitty gritties around how you do it, how you make it safe, how you've got all the safeguards in place. And it's huge amounts of money that are needed. Up in Scotland a few years ago, we had the named person legislation taken to judicial review. And, you know, that's not easy, because here it was taken to the Court of Session and they basically threw it out, but they allowed the appeal. So then it had to be taken to the UK Supreme Court. And finally there we got a favourable response. And so the legislation was supposedly stopped, and now it's voluntary, although if you listen to local authorities up here, you wouldn't believe it was voluntary. But there's that whole kind of thing that it's whatever you're embarking on, there are various phases, and you can get small costs, I say small, of thousands, but the minute you're into judicial review, we're talking tens of thousands. And so it's a difficult process that we're going through, but it's I think fairly crucial. And certainly Schoolhouse cannot do this, but it's also why I'm part of this process of hoping that we will be able to have it as a sister organisation. And I think that should be true for a lot of the organisations already set up in England and Wales and Northern Ireland.
Yeah, that's helpful. Thank you. Okay, do we have any more questions? I'd encourage you, if you've got any questions, jot them down in the chat and we can pick them up. If anyone wants to chip in, just raise a hand, or obviously ask your questions. Anything you want to say? What have we got here? Ooh, my screen.
And if the temporary web page is throwing up errors and saying it's all unsecure and it's not, I've put the temporary email address in as well. So if you really are getting stuck, just email us and we'll be like, we'll add you. It's just to kind of capture people's contact details so that we're then ready to be like, hey, we're ready.
Absolutely, yeah.
So.
Okay, we have got one or two comments here. So we've got Lisa James. It says it would be brilliant to get high profile home educators on board too. So she's thinking Paul Weller.
Maybe Charlotte Church or someone.
That would be great, wouldn't it? Especially
if anyone knows famous home editors, send them our way.
Yeah, and then and you've just put the Gmail.
And I had to laugh. Was it Sam who suggested the logo should be a jackal? I thought yes.
Yeah. So yeah. Any more questions? Do pipe up. Otherwise, yeah. I think we've covered it. I think you've done a great job of explaining the rationale behind it, the reasoning, and yeah, very enlightening. And hopefully, just wish you all the best with that. We're all right behind you, and we'll look forward to seeing more as it develops and seeing this jackal bearing website.
I'll have to hide a photo of one somewhere for people who are on this call. They can be like, oh.
Or maybe one of those, what's those pictures where you kind of look at it, and if you look at it right, it morphs into something else, something a little bit more.
Again, if we have any home ed children who like drawing that sort of stuff, then that's great.
Yeah, let's get the word out. Okay, so I think probably we've finished about there. Thank you very much for your time, everybody, and yeah, we'll all be looking out with expectation, and yeah, just hope it all goes well. So thank you very much for your time. It's been great.
Thank you.